finishing up and doing a quick summary of what we've all heard today. And thank you for hanging in there, everybody, and sticking it through on this final session, which I think will be very interesting because I've listened closely all day, and I have to say the conversation from my perspective has been a little unbalanced. I think there's a lot of point of view on what the work experience should be, which is all very, very important. But at the end of the day, we're going to have to create some economic value and growth. And so I've got a great set of experts, and I'd like to point out first that the chief economist from EY Parthenon has made the point that we now have 6 consecutive quarters in the United States in which we've had negative growth and less growth than the year previous. So, and furthermore, he laid part of that at the feet of hybrid work. So I think it's a big problem. And I have 3 very esteemed members who you've heard from before, but I'd like to hear their opinions juxtaposed. So we have Raj. Raj is quoted as saying, work from home or hybrid work is a hindrance to employee engagement and culture building. Dr. Gleb, you're quoted as saying, employers can reap the rewards of a more engaged and satisfied workforce, resulting in higher productivity and lower turnover rates. And third, we have Russell Cooper, who has a front row seat in many of the largest assets around the United States, who's quoted as saying, ultimately, the verdict on the debate will be rendered by the competitive factors in workplace and marketplace. So I think we have 3 different perspectives. We have a lot of very smart people with completely different points of view on how to work our way through hybrid. How can this be true? And we'd like to explore that a little bit. So let me move forward. I'd like to pose one question first. What path should companies take? So I'd like to have each of you just sort of tell us your perspective on hybrid and what's the right path.
Thank you, Lou. So I'm glad you started with the EY Parthenon mention of the study. I actually have a Fortune article about this topic. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the productivity growth, the dynamic that happened was that productivity growth spiked at the beginning of the pandemic. So you'll see, you can go to the data, Q2 2020 was going up, Q3 2022, and so on. And it started going down at Q1 2022, which was the return to office mandate time. And then kept going down with the increasing return to office mandates, and keeping going down with increasing return to office mandates. So it's very clear that it's the mandated return to office that is causing the drop in productivity. Because companies aren't adopting the strategies that I mentioned earlier to address the 4 horsemen of the mandated return to office. They're not being smart about how they're returning to the office. They're forcing people, they're not engaging with them. So Raj talked about empathy, support, trust. These are echoing themes of what I mentioned in my keynote, like that's what you want to do. And people like Elon Musk, that is not what they're doing. So if you don't have that approach, you're going to have what the EY Parthenon chief economist called the imperfect hybrid. Yeah, it's imperfect, of course, if you're going to shove it down people's throats. So the future of hybrid will be economically, the companies that are smart about it will win out because they'll keep the talent, they'll keep their productivity high. The companies that are not being smart about it, and we know plenty of big names that are not very smart about it, we can very clearly see it in the news and what's happening to them, they will lose out. They will lose out value. They will lose out on good employees. They are losing productivity right and left. And you have to empathize with the CEOs. and others, they don't really know better. They think that, okay, these people aren't being as productive as they were before. We need to get them into the office because I can observe them, I can see them. Well, guess what? When you look at how much people work in the office, on average, studies show they work in the office 36 to 39% of their time. So managing by walking around is not a good strategy. It's kind of deceptive. You think you have control over these people. It's called the illusion of control. When you look at the behavioral science literature, it's an illusion. You don't have nearly as much control over people as you think you do. The reality is that you need to trust people. You need to empathize with them, and you need to support them. And they will reward you by being trustworthy. If you don't trust them, they will reward you by not being trustworthy. So that's where you really need to think about. The future of hybrid for successful companies will be trusting people, will be empathizing with them, and will be supporting them in doing what they need. And that's, I think, how you will win.
Thank you. I can't wait to jump in here, and I appreciate everyone's time here. And I also recognize, Lou, we're all that stands between these fine people and a nice glass of Sonoma wine, so we're going to try to be efficient. Okay. So as Lou explained, I work for an office investment management firm, and so my views are informed by capital flows. And for most owners of office buildings, I think we would all readily agree that this answer to the question is going to be different based on the type of industry or the company or the user group. So there's a lot of nuance there. We recognize that. But what we are seeing across our portfolio, which is across the US, Canada, and a little bit in Europe, is small tenant demand is very robust. And there's this clear inverse correlation between the size of a company and their commitment to using office space. And by commitment, I mean entering into leases and actually utilizing their space. And our view is we think that is driven by the fact that small business generally means small balance sheets, smaller operating margins, and therefore less tolerance for impairment on productivity. So our view is small business has voted with their wallet in effect, and taking it even smaller if we look at co-working utilization, which is not great, but it's okay. And this is not enterprise co-working, which is a failed business plan, it's a whole other topic, but traditional co-working where you're talking about an individual contractor or a very, very small business, they're voting with their wallet and they're coming out of pocket to buy that in-office experience. So the great question is, these big corporate employers, which has been most of what we've been talking about today, what are they feeling in terms of these capital pressures? We've had a big pivot from a growth orientation by not just tech, but all corporate America, I think, to more earnings focus. And we are sensing that some of this recent push to return to office is driven by that. And so we're really sort of fascinated on where it goes from here for those larger employers. Well, I was saying for large corporations in particular, we are over the past year, because of rising cost of capital, there's been a significant shift from a growth orientation to an earnings orientation. And in effect, shareholders are asking for businesses, large and small, to focus on the bottom line and not be so concerned about funding growth. And so that is going to, and has, we think, begun to translate into more of a focus and more of a push to return to office, because right or wrong, we see these big employers, Dr. Gleb, to your point, they think they're going to be more productive in the office place. Well, I can go on here.
Obviously, Google, Amazon, Meta, Salesforce, they all have these new initiatives to push the employees back into the office. So I think what you're saying, we are seeing. Please go on.
So I'm going to open up a whole nother can of worms. Here we go, Lou. We talked over the course of the day about sort of mid-management and mid-level career people being much more focused about the hybrid and working from home for a variety of reasons. And one of the things that we know early on in the pandemic was mid-level and senior engineers definitely had an uptick in productivity. But the long-run consequences is that entry-level and junior engineers were not getting the mentorship. So the aggregate effect, I understand, is a negative outcome in terms of productivity for a lot of these large firms around their engineering programs. And I should pass the baton here and let people address that.
Yeah. Raj, Wipro is an enormous company, very successful, 260,000 employees. Wipro has a facility in Bangalore that's 50 million square feet and not a lot of people in it. How are you feeling?
So I'll start again with what I said in the morning and what Dr. Gleb called out. So it is still prevalent on how do you build that trust, make sure that you show the empathy and you show support for the employee. I think that's still critical. Having said that, my take and how we've seen this pan out during the pandemic is that I think there was an aspect of fear factor as the pandemic set in and all of us were home. There was an aspect of nothing else to do at that point in time, and work probably took precedence over everything else in that sense. I think as that year came through and we entered into 2022, I think it has been a combination of multiple things. One, there are more things for people to do, which is a distraction, whether it is, I'm not saying it is good or bad, I'm just saying the work from home introduces a level of distraction for the individual or the individuals. We've seen families, and Wipro is an employer where we have multiple folks who are, I would say the other way around. Let me say that the average age is well below 30. So when you look at an age factor like that, there's a lot more for the individuals to do now when they are working remote. Many of them have families that they're just starting off. So the demand on time for them is very different from what it would be if they were back in office. So when we are looking at something like this and the impact of that on the productivity, we're not going behind them to say you're not working. Where we are looking at it is from the fact that how do we create an environment for them to be able to get the same level or maybe a better level of support system within our office, within our premises, within satellite offices that we can set up for them. So they feel safe, they feel that the environment is capable enough of taking care of what they need. How does that enable them to get back in? It's not that they do not want to come back into work. People are eager to meet their managers. People are eager to meet their teams. It is the demand on their personal time and what they've gotten used to over a 12-month, 18-month or a 24-month period, which is inhibiting their ability to be able to say, yes, I commit to come back into office full time, right? And I think that's the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think it is important for all of us to recognize that and solve for it. Otherwise, we're living in this myth that, you can just do everything remote. And I don't think that's a reality. I think we are all human beings. There is an interpersonal relationship and an interaction capability that we build only as we meet other people. And I think that's the enablement that we need to bring on board for the people.
Right. Very good. Well, you can hear some people in the audience are ready to freak out. That's great. I'm happy about that because now it's not so clear, is it? Let's do something. Let's spend.
You're saying different things, but it's the hypothesis that it's better. That's what you're saying.
Let me. Okay, let me build up a little bit on the conversation. So there was a good study that came out recently which showed that if computer programmers are located in the same area with junior staff members, they individually, senior staff members or experienced ones, are going to be less productive, but they're going to spend more time mentoring people. And so you'll have less individual productivity, but you'll have, in the long run, more development of junior staff. So I think this gets to exactly what you mentioned. So the key there, I've helped 24 organizations transition to figuring out the return to office. What doesn't work is to try to get senior staff to come into the office just for the sake of mentoring junior staff and hope it happens by osmosis. What I tend to see is that senior staff members come into the office, they put on their headphones, they go into their personal office, and they resent when Mark Benioff or Mark Zuckerberg tells them that you're going into the office just to mentor those junior staff. They're like, I hate those little bleeps. That's the response. That's the natural human response, right? Who would not have that response? If they're forcing you to go to drive for 2 hours, go into the office when you can be much more productive at home, hoping that you'll run into those junior people occasionally and then, share your pearls of wisdom with them, right? And then go back, drive 2 hours back home. That doesn't work well. What works, and that's why you're seeing the dropping productivity. What works is to set up an effective mentoring program where people know what they're coming into the office for. They know that they're coming in to mentor junior people. There's a time spent mentoring junior people, and that's an effective time. And those senior people know, okay, I'm coming in to do something that helps the company, it's worth the commute, and I have some other meetings set up so that I can see that my boss is minimizing my commute time. Talked about that, minimizing commute time, very important. And then you have the effective mentoring of junior people. They get developed. Senior people aren't pissed. In fact, they're happy that they can really help develop those junior people and that they can minimize their time commuting. So that's an approach that works. And of course, for junior people, they're happy about it. They're happy to come into the office. So that's an approach that works. That's kind of that balance that you need to find. Yes, it happens best face-to-face. I mean, there's, I can explain why. So, because people feel vulnerable, junior people feel vulnerable, revealing that they don't know stuff, and they build up that trust face-to-face much better. You can start at face-to-face, you can continue it virtually, but you definitely need to at least start face-to-face and have some occasional face-to-face meetings. But yes, that definitely happens better face-to-face especially in the start, but I recommend doing it face-to-face as much as possible.
I may just add to that we see across all types of businesses as you go up from sort of mid and senior management to executive and leadership to individuals that have, in effect, equity in the platform. Those people are in the office because they're invested in the outcome of the company. And so some of this is a misalignment of incentives. Said differently, the closer an employee is to the value of the company, not just a paycheck and a bonus, the more we see them in the office. And well, my point is more. I would disagree. This might be a question for people in the room working more closely with users, but we see, certainly true in the past where the decision maker is choosing his own lifestyle ahead of his workforce. But I think in more recent years, particularly for larger tech companies, we're seeing location decisions driven by what's optimal for the employees across the company. I'm seeing some nodding heads, but yeah. But really, I do come back to sort of the incentives for those experienced senior engineers or mid-level managers. They're not compensated to deal with that punk junior engineer, and that's part of the problem.
Just to nuance that, and what I tend to see is that it's not that they're built by the senior engineer leaders, but it's that they can afford to live next to the office. So I think that's just being a little bit more charitable.
Yeah, I don't think nap rooms are high on their list, but I did hear that as a required amenity earlier today. Raj, what's Wipro's policy today? Do they have one? Could you state it? And how do you ensure that people are actually abiding by that policy and that the policy is actually returning value back to Wipro?
Sure. It's a very important question because it comes with measurement and how flexible or agile is that entire process. So the policy has evolved, I would say, over the last year. We were patient. We waited for making sure that there was not one global policy that we rolled out. We rolled it out by country, by region, so that it was in alignment with how individual countries or regions were getting over the pandemic issue, and the Fed or the government was enabling people to cope up with it. So we started with senior employees coming back into office 2 days a week. I think that was the first part of the policy, and we chose to do that because we wanted to make sure that leadership shows that commitment, and that's how we lead with example across the organization. I will tell you that there was resistance at that layer. It was not consistent, even in the countries that we piloted it. It took time for us, so we took that additional time to make sure that before we roll it out to the subsequent part of the organization, we learn from what we're getting out of it, right? I think that was the start of the policy itself. Now, fast track over, we are in 2023, where effective this summer, we've instituted a 3-day a week back to the office, and this is for everybody in the team, and that will be effective between summer and fall, depending on which country and where you are across the globe. And the intention of that is to continue this process so that we are able to support a back to the office with supporting systems, processes, tools, and the ease of that experience that I spoke about as part of the initiative that we were running internally. But that's part and parcel of how the evolution has been. Now, has that improved productivity, and how is that helping? What I would say is we are starting to measure the productivity, and we have tools, we have mechanisms of being able to look at how the productivity, especially for tech force, right? This is predominantly a tech force, so we do have the ability to do that. Even when they were remote, we were actually doing it actively. So we knew what the team productivity was for support work that they were doing, for development work that they were doing, and so on and so forth. Some of these we were mandated because we had to report it for the client that they were working for as well. So we're fairly advanced in terms of how we do that. So we do have the tools and the paraphernalia required to be able to do it. But the more important aspect there is, I go back to the first three things, right? Are we showing the trust, empathy, and the empowerment or the support for the employees? And I think that continues to be the bottom line of the policy evolvement that happens within Wipro. I will go back to the comment that Dr. Gleb made in the start of the previous question about are people coming back in, and are we losing productivity, especially as you look at junior folks, especially as you look at enforcing a senior person to be able to mentor them. I fundamentally feel that we all came into the job at the start of our career. We were mentored by somebody, right? If we were not, we would not be here today. So I fundamentally feel that it is in our DNA, and we have to take that responsibility as senior leaders. If we don't, then we're not doing the right thing for the organization in that sense. Now, I'm not saying that has to mandate a in-person 5-day a week. All I'm saying is that it has to be, like Dr. Gleb pointed out, that a part of the GNO that we lay out for the senior employees of how to do it, enable them in such a way that they do it. But I fundamentally believe that is a part and parcel of every senior person's role, that if they do not mentor a few individuals who are joining us in fresh from their graduate or undergraduate colleges, then we're not doing the right thing for the organization. So I'll stop with that.
Yeah, if there's anyone else, yeah.
Maybe just a quick example. Annie, who runs the last name is real estate, came from a digital background. And one of the things that she did is she downsized the investments in real estate, and she requires that people get together. I think it's once a month. Sell those dinners, but it's part of their proposition. So the question for you guys, maybe get both points of view, is it the fact that people are getting together that's most important, or that people are getting together in the office?
So, yeah.
Buying expensive.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the key is for people to get together. The question is what best facilitates them getting together. I do find that for my clients, It's generally the case, not all of them. I mean, two of them chose to be like Atlassian, a remote first company. And for those companies, it was the right choice. One of them was a research institute, not ISI, but one that had a lot less collaboration between people. Another one is a tech startup, like it's 100-ish people, and they really want talent to be available everywhere. And so that was really important. For most of my clients, hybrid first is a really good policy because they can arrange their office to be exactly what they want. They can have it branded, they can have it managed, they can have the right technology. And so you can set up the kind of office experience for your staff that you want. So I generally do advise for the large majority of companies to be hybrid first and have their own office. That doesn't mean that people have to come to the office 3 times a week or even once a week. There are some companies that have people come into the office for like 3 days once a month, and that's fine if that works for them and if they are, especially for tech companies. So the key is for them to get together. The office of the company generally tends to be a good place, and one of my clients has a nice phrase that the on-site is the new off-site. So I like that phrase. So I asked if I could steal it, and she said that's fine. So the on-site is the new off-site, where they have, like I mentioned, that for 3 days, once a month sort of activity, getting together, where there's mentoring happening, there's socializing happening, there's connection happening. That's really valuable. So those are the kinds of things that you definitely want people to get together. I recommend that for most companies, getting together in their own office is the right idea, and it works well.
Well, there's hope, Russ.
I would jump in and say you want both of those. The sailboat excursion is great for I'm a sailor. I love that. It's great for building those strong ties, those connections, and having some understanding of what makes your colleagues tick and having a laugh. But the in-office experience, particularly for small business, is a very efficient way for rapid communication. And big companies achieve that through Slack and other tools. Small companies achieve that by the old school intercom, which is yelling out the window at your door to your analysts that's right out there. And so that would be our view.
Yeah. Hey, Myron. Yes, Holly.
Hi. I just have a question. So I lead the global partnership for Google at Wipro, and unless I missed it, nobody's brought up Google's uniqueness in the office space, right? So they have younger workers coming in and working for Google, and when they leave, like when they did the layoffs, they have no idea that that's not normal, right? So they get breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack rooms, every drink you can think of, laundry service, they have speakeasies, they have bars, secret rooms, they have band rooms where you can go jam on electric guitars and play the drums. And that kind of gets the boat and the event back into the office, but also just such a uniqueness that they don't even go shopping for food, right? Yeah, they asked Google for compensation for all their meals while they were working from home.
They actually did.
To them.
They actually did.
I also survived WorldCom when they crashed, and we had to bring our own coffee to the office.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just thinking, going back to what you were saying about it has to be a mix between the two. I think it's really important, and we cannot forget about the 70% that are remote. The companies loved hiring the best talent in the cheaper areas and not having to pay real estate for that. And now those people are sitting out there in a cluster environment, which they agreed to remote. But how do you solve for that? You know, you have to have budget around it. It needs to be a priority. You have to take your leaders along for that journey. Say, we need funding to bring these teams together once, twice a year, which could be thousands and thousands of people. So I think it's fun socializing, but then it's also the training, the onboarding, the mentorship. There just needs to be so much more investment and funding for the people aspect than just real estate.
Oh, good point, Alana, and thank you for that. There's scores of companies that have decided to go completely remote. 3M, Atlassian, Airbnb, Coinbase, Blackbaud, Dropbox, Lyft, SAP, not exactly a small company, Reddit, Spotify, Shopify, Instacart, SoFi, VMware, Square, Snowflake, Twitter, Zoom, on. So a lot of companies that are going to have to think about it from the other point of view. Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about what I'm observing is that there's a lack of data. And I think everybody said that today, really. It's a very common comment. And I think we need a much better data set. But we do have some heuristics. We know that we want to create a magnet, not a mandate. I'm partial to that, to phrasing it that way. And there's some really good research out there on the 5 things that why people aren't coming to the office. And there's some really good research on why people are coming to the office. So the 2 lists actually creates a framework for how to structure a change management program, what to measure, and when you make a change, to see if it's actually having a beneficial effect on attendance and on productivity, mentorship, whatever the things are that you're trying to measure. But it soon becomes all about just getting started. So I'd like to ask the panelists just for their advice. How does one get started on a program, on a change management program?
Sure. So I think the first thing to think about is to get your employees engaged. That is the first part of it. You want buy-in. You want support from your employees. So you want to survey them on what they're feeling and what they're thinking. And they will not always give the answer that actually aligns with reality, but you can certainly help you get that information and sift through it. And the most important thing is that they will be heard. And from behavioral science perspective, if you want their buy-in into whatever conclusion you'll get eventually, you want them to feel heard in that change management program. So that's key. And the question to ask is your employees is, what is the office for from their perspective? What do they think it is for? What are the reasons that they don't like to go to the office? It generally matches these top 5 reasons. The commute is definitely cited as really the number 1 thing that I hear from people. The reasons that they go to the office: creative collaboration, mentorship, like I said, on-the-job training, socializing, conversations. Those are the reasons they want to go to the office. If they're junior and they don't have their own workspace, there's what some of the Gensler folks discovered about, I want to go to the office in order to do some work. But that tends to be people who are junior and don't have a good space at home. So you want people to feel like you care about them, and you should care about them, but you also want to show that. And so you want to get their feedback, you want to get their opinions, then you want to get the top leadership involved and see this return to the office as a strategic problem, not as a tactical problem to be thrown to the HR people or the IT people or the facilities people. but to get the top leadership involved and have them work out the values. What are the values? What are the decision-making criteria that they will use to return to the office? What, from their perspective, given the data that they're having from their people, now that you got it up there, and from all the information that you have, what should inform their decision-making? And then once you have that information, you can actually figure out what tactics you will pursue. And of course, you'll want to measure success. I talked about measurement earlier. But that's the approach. You want to get the data from your people, you want to get the data from your technology, you want to get the buy-in from your people, help them feel heard, then you want to get your top leadership to take it seriously as a strategic problem. And then, based on that, have measurements, have interventions, see how well your intervention is working based on the measurement, and then change it around to improve the intervention to get whatever outcomes your top leadership determined is what you're going for.
Let me add that I think there are a number of areas where building owners can help users. As I look at this list, wellness, technology, collaboration spaces, and there's a role for building owners for sure. I will say the scariest thing on this list comes to sort of commute time and more specific public transportation systems. And you can lose a lot of sleep at night thinking about where we're going in certain markets. I dare say most markets across this country. And that is a real issue here because obviously the freeways are packed. There's only so many parking garage spaces in these big urban centers. And we are going to be very, very reliant on public transit to get people back into the office. And many of the systems are just frankly failing. So I don't have an answer to that one. That's going to require municipalities and transit authorities and frankly taxpayers to help solve that. But that's a big concern.
That's a different underlying problem. Being a technology company, the part that I would say here is the last thing we want to do is throw technology to solve this problem. I wouldn't start there. The approach that I would call out again to support what Dr. Gleb was saying there is it needs to be looked at from the industry, then the function of the team that the individuals are working for, which essentially means take a persona-based view to who those individuals are, the role and the function and the work they're doing. What does that mean for them to be able to be productive in the job that they're playing? And I think then if you overlay, both what Russ talked about and what Dr. Gleb talked about, you would actually start uncovering the problems that the employee or the worker coming back into the office is going to face. Solve for those problems, and as you solve for those problems, technology probably becomes an enabler for that. Process and system in the macro environment becomes a part and parcel of it, and I think that's the journey that we've got to take. Honestly, I don't believe this is going to resolve itself in the next 3 to 5 years as well. It's a longer game. I think that's the game that we've got to, align ourselves to say that's how this game has to be played. There is no short-term solution to it in my mind.
I think those are great comments to close on, actually. I think we were at the beginning stages of a very long journey, and we should enjoy that journey as we learn more. I certainly learned a lot today, and it's been a great conversation. I'd like to turn it over to Carl for closing remarks. Thank you, panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.